We're all familiar with Matthew 14 because it is a passage where Jesus and his new group of disciples feed 5,000 people. It's a story where we see a group of disciples who literally doubt that they can do this amazing thing that Jesus is doing. And yet with him as their guide, he shows them that it is possible. Today's passage is another Matthew 14 story where Jesus does something similar. After they had finished feeding 5,000 people, Jesus makes the disciples get into the boat to go on ahead to the other side of the sea, which really wasn't a sea. I mean, it's just a big lake. And he says he will meet up with them later. And then he stays behind to dismiss the crowd. Once the crowd is gone, Jesus, he goes up the mountain to pray by himself, which he so often did. But then the text shifts to the scene back in the boat with the disciples. The text says that when evening came, he was there alone praying. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from land. And the disciples are safely in the boat as the water is crashing all around them. And early in the morning, Jesus comes walking toward them on the water. First, they think it's a ghost. This couldn't really be Jesus. But he says, as he does so many times, he says, "Do not be afraid. Guys, it's really me, I promise." Peter, who was a natural leader in the group, says, "Lord, if it's really you, then command me to come to you on the water." We know what happens next. This is a familiar story, but we so often miss so much. So we can't just skip over what Peter just did. I mean, so many times in the church, us modern day disciples just sit back complacent to what is happening in the world around us, waiting for someone else to do the ministry that is so desperately needed. Peter sees the waves crashing, and he sees Jesus out there in the middle of the crashing waves, and he says to Jesus, he says, "If it's really you, command me to come." The other disciples just sit back complacent, perhaps terrified at what Jesus is doing. They're just sitting back, murmuring all around Peter. I mean, just like they did when Jesus told them to feed 5,000 people. They thought it was impossible. It can't be done. Yet the scriptures tell us that anything is possible with God. But there they are sitting safely in the boat, and the only one that has the courage and the faith to step up to meet Jesus in the water, the only one who steps up to do anything is Peter. And see what he did? Before he takes one step out of the boat, he had already done so much. You see, Peter opened himself up to the possibility of what seemed impossible. He opened himself up to the power of Jesus in his life. Look, you can sit comfortably in your pew. You can sit at home comfortable on your couch. You can sit comfortably in your boat and ignore the waves of the world that are crashing all around us. Friends, God will not take God's love away from you because you refuse to get out of the boat. God's going to love you no matter what. I mean, you can just stay safe in the sanctuary, and there are times that Jesus will climb into the boat with us and meet us in our sanctuaries and meet us in our fear of the world, in our fear of the water that is crashing all around us, in our fear of what seems impossible. But if you want to be a true disciple, then you must know that in the Hebrew history, that disciples don't just learn from their rabbi. Disciples follow their rabbi so that they can learn to do what their rabbi does. If you want to be a true disciple of Jesus, if you want to follow Rabbi Jesus out into the world, then you have to open yourself up to the power of Jesus in your life. You have to make an intentional decision in your life to stand up and say, "Jesus, I see you out there walking on the water, calling me to join you in the crashing waves. command me to come. Jesus, I see you out there, feeding the hungry and caring for the sick and visiting prisoners. I see you out there marching for justice and building relationships of love and compassion with those who are not like us. I see you out there welcoming the migrant and loving those who are our enemies and tearing down walls. I see you out there crying with mamas who've lost their babies and praying for the world to be made whole. There are so many problems in our world. The waves are crashing all around us. And how do I know it's really Jesus out there in the crashing waves? How do I know it's really Jesus in the midst of those people? How do I really know it's possible for me to make a difference? Can I really feed 5,000 people? Can I really walk on water? Jesus, can I really do what you do? I mean, you have to open yourself up to the power of Jesus in your life. You have to open yourself up to the possibility of what seems impossible. But that's only part of it. As Reverend John Ortberg, a pastor and author, exclaims in the title of one of his books, he says, if you want to walk on water, you gotta get out of the boat. Friends, if you want to walk on water with Jesus, if you want to be his disciple, if you want to do what your rabbi does, then you've got to get your feet wet. You see, it's one thing to say, Jesus, use me. It's one thing to sing, here I am, Lord. It's a totally different thing to say it and to mean it. It's a totally different thing to step out of the boat and get your feet wet in the crashing waves. It's a totally different thing to actually trust Jesus when he says, come. As Peter steps out of the boat onto the water, he begins to walk toward Jesus. But when Peter noticed the strong wind, he got scared and he started to sink. And Jesus catches him and says, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And then he helps Peter back into the boat. I mean, notice what happened in that part of the passage. You see, it's okay to get scared sometimes that you might not be able to do what Jesus is calling you to do, even after stepping out in faith. When your feet are wet in the water and you're out there wobbling around, it's okay to get scared. Jesus will be there to catch you if you fall. He will be there to pick you back up if you fail. But in this passage, Jesus isn't the one who started to sink because of Peter's doubt. It wasn't Jesus sinking, it's Peter. It's himself. Peter doubts and then he starts to sink. I mean, we already know that he trusted Jesus. He said, Lord, if it's you, command me to come. And then he got out of the boat. He trusted Jesus. But when he noticed the wind, he got scared, and just perhaps, maybe he started to doubt himself. He didn't have faith in himself. Jesus isn't going to ask you to come into the crashing waves if he doesn't believe in you. If he doesn't believe you can do it. But Jesus also knows that with God, anything is possible. With Jesus by our side, we can feed 5,000 people. With Jesus by our side, we can walk on water. With Jesus by our side, we can heal brokenness and pain in the world. With Jesus by our side, we can change what seems unchangeable. We can forgive what seems unforgivable. We can love those who seem unlovable. With Jesus by our side, we can do anything. I mean, I know there are a lot of waves crashing all around us right now with COVID and racism and protests and riots, abuse and hunger. The problems seem so big. The waves seem so large sometimes, but it's a choice. It's a choice to be like all the other disciples murmuring around Peter in the boat. It's a choice to sit back in the safety of your boat while the waves of injustice are drowning those most vulnerable. It's a choice to be complacent when the Savior is calling us out from the places that seem so safe, when the Savior is calling us out of those places, out into the places that seem dangerous, saying, do not be afraid. It's a choice. It's also a choice to be like Peter, to stand up when you see Jesus out in the crashing waves. It's a choice to open yourself up to trust Jesus, to say to Him, if it's really you out there, then command me to come. And friends, it's a choice to step out of the boat and to get your feet wet. I mean, right now, Jesus is out there, out walking on the water through the crashing waves of a world that is broken and hurting. And He is saying to those of us who are willing to open ourselves up and trust Him, He is saying, do not be afraid. Come. Friends, trust Him. Get out of the boat. Be willing to follow Jesus. Be willing to get your feet wet.